For 5 years, I funneled $237, 468 of my own money into my son and his wife's dream life, mortgaging my own home to do it. I thought I was building a family, but to them, I was just an ATM. And when they decided their ATM wasn't welcome at Christmas, I decided it was time to close their account for good. If you believe that respect should be earned, not bought, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon. You won't want to miss how this story ends. The grit of the mortar under my fingernails is a feeling I've known for 30 years. It's a part of me. Like the calluses on my palms or the faint ache in my lower back on a cold morning, each brick I lay is a small piece of a larger promise. A solid, tangible thing in a world that often feels like it's made of smoke. I take pride in my work. A straight line. A perfect joint. A wall that will stand long after I'm gone. As I smooth the excess mortar from a joint, squinting under the Ohio sun, I wasn't just thinking about the building code. I was thinking about my son, Ethan. Every brick was for him. A better start than I had. A future built on a foundation I'd spent my life creating. I remember his college graduation like it was yesterday. The sun was just as bright, glinting off the sea of dark caps and gowns. When they called his name, the sound of my own applause felt distant, drowned out by the pride swelling in my chest. Later, with his diploma in hand, he had a look in his eye, a mix of excitement and terror that every young person has when they stare into the vast expanse of their own future. He was talking about his girlfriend, Chloe, about their plans, a life together, a home. Dad, I don't know how we'll ever afford it. The market is insane. I clapped him on the shoulder, the scratchy fabric of his gown rough against my palm. We'll figure it out. I told him, you just worry about being happy. I'll take care of the rest. It was a promise made from the heart, the kind a father makes without thinking twice. A year later, I was sitting in the cold, air-conditioned silence of a bank office. The chair was uncomfortable, too modern for my taste. In front of me were papers that represented the single largest financial decision of my life. My own house, the one I'd finished paying off 6 years prior, was being put up as collateral. I was taking out a second mortgage. The loan officer, a man half my age in a suit that was too tight, slid a final document across the polished desk. The total amount was printed in stark black ink, $237. That was the price of my son's future. The cost of his happiness with Chloe in a nice suburban neighborhood called Silver Creek. I signed my name, the pen feeling unnaturally heavy in my hand, driving home that day. I looked at my own small Temers, modest house. It felt different, lighter. Somehow, less mine, but I pushed the feeling down. This was what a father did. Chloe loved to post pictures on Instagram. Her page was a curated gallery of a perfect life, filtered sunlight, artisanal coffee cups, and a lot of hashtags. A few months after they moved in, a picture popped up on my phone. It was their new living room. Sunlight streamed through expensive silk curtains, illuminating the pristine oak floors. Chloe was in the center of the frame, holding a glass of wine, smiling a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The caption read, "Hard work finally paying off. So blessed to be building our dream home. Number boss babe, number hustle." I looked at my own hands, caked in dried cement and marked with a new scar on the knuckle. I tapped the little heart icon under her picture and went back to work. That brings me to 3 days before Christmas. The scent of pine from the small tree I'd set up in the corner of my living room filled the quiet house. I was on a stepladder, carefully hanging a glass ornament. A fragile little red ball that had been my mother's. I was looking forward to our Christmas dinner. Ethan had said they'd host this year in their new home. A real family Christmas. He'd called it. My phone started ringing, playing the simple, old-fashioned ringtone I'd never bothered to change. It was Ethan. "Hey, son, just getting in the spirit over here," I said, a smile in my voice. There was a pause on the other end. Too long. "Hey, Dad." His voice was strained. "Hesitant. Listen. About Christmas." I stopped what I was doing, the ornament still dangling from my fingers. "Yeah, what time do you want me over? Should I bring my scalloped potatoes? I know Chloe loves them." Another pause. I could hear faint music in the background. A Christmas carol. "Well? See. That's the thing. Dad, Chloe's parents are in town. And, well, they want to have a more private atmosphere this year. A certain vibe. You know." The words didn't register at first. They floated in the air. Meaningless syllables. Private atmosphere vibe. My entire body went cold. A sudden, shocking chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather outside. The glass ornament felt heavy, its string cutting into my skin. "What are you talking about?" "Ethan." My voice came out flat. "It's just. Chloe wants everything to be perfect for them. You know how she gets. It's not a big deal. We can do something after New Year's.com. Just you and me. I promise. Just you and me." As if I were a side appointment to be rescheduled. I looked around my small, quiet living room. I looked at the hands that had paid for the private atmosphere he was talking about. I saw the bank statements on my desk. The constant, draining transfer of $2. $800 a month. Every month. For 5 straight years. The silk curtains. The oak floors. All of it. "I see," I said. The words tasted like ash. I couldn't think of anything else to say. My son, my only child, was telling me I wasn't welcome at Christmas because I didn't fit the vibe. "Dad, I'm so sorry," he said. But the apology was weak. Hollow. A formality. "It's fine. Ethan, you have a Merry Christmas." I hung up the phone before he could reply. Placing it gently back in its cradle, I stood there for a long moment. The little red ornament still in my hand. The house was utterly silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Affrontique. Trapped bird. I sank onto the arm of my worn-out leather chair. The one my own father had left me. 5 years. 60 payments. Countless hours of overtime. Working weekends. Ignoring the screaming protests of my own aging body. All for a vibe I wasn't a part of. A memory surfaced. Unbidden. It was from a few years back. When Chloe had deigned to visit my house for the first and only time, she'd walked through the door and her eyes had swept over my simple, clean living room. Her lips pursed in a tight little line. She'd looked at the framed photos of my late wife, at the comfortable but faded furniture, at the sturdy, handmade bookshelf I'd built myself. "Oh, Wesley," she'd said, her voice dripping with a kind of pity that was worse than any insult. "Your place is so cozy." Cozy. The word she used for something small, old, and unimportant. The word she used for a life she felt was beneath her, and by extension, beneath my sun. At the time, I had brushed it off. But now, sitting in the silence, the memory had the sharp, metallic taste of truth. I wasn't family to her. I was a resource. An embarrassing, blue-collar ATM who built things with his hands so she could live in a house where everything was bought and paid for. The emptiness in my chest began to curdle, changing into something else. It wasn't a hot, explosive anger. It was a cold, dense weight, the kind of anger that doesn't scream, but calculates, the kind that builds walls, brick by solid brick. I wasn't their foundation. I was their doormat, and they had just finished wiping their feet on me for the last time. Slowly, I stood up. I walked over to the small Christmas tree and carefully placed the red ornament back in its box, cushioned in old tissue paper. I closed the lid. Christmas was over. I walked with a steady, deliberate pace to the old wooden filing cabinet in my small home office. The second drawer squeaked as I pulled it open. It was filled with manila folders, each neatly labeled in my blocky handwriting. I flipped past tax, truck maintenance, and utilities. I found the one I was looking for. The label read, Ethan, Silver Creek Property. I pulled it out and set it on the desk. Inside was 5 years of my life in paper form. The loan documents for my own second mortgage, copies of every single bank statement showing the $2, 800, wire transfer, receipts for furniture, for appliances, for landscaping work. It was all there. A thick, heavy monument to a one-sided love. I sat there for a long time, just looking at it. The numbers swam before my eyes. They weren't just numbers anymore. They were years of my life. They were missed vacations. A truck that was 10 years older than it should be. A retirement that felt further away every month. My breath steadied. The frantic bird in my chest was calm now. It was waiting. My eyes fell on the phone. Not my cell phone, but the old landline on my desk, the one with the comforting weight and the coiled cord. I picked up the receiver. The dial tone was a steady, resolute hum. Me fingers, thick and calloused from a lifetime of labor, moved with precision as I dialed the number for my bank's customer service line. I knew it by heart. After a few rings, a cheerful voice answered. "Thank you for calling National Trust Bank. My name is Brenda. How can I help you today?" I took a deep breath, the air feeling clean and sharp in my lungs for the first time all day. My voice, when I spoke, was perfectly level. It held no anger, no sadness. It was the voice of a man making a simple, factual statement. "Hello, Brenda. I'd like to cancel a recurring automatic payment." There was a series of clicks on the line as Brenda, the cheerful bank employee, processed my request. Each click was a snip of the scissors, severing a tie I had mistaken for love, but was, in fact, merely a financial obligation. She confirmed the cancellation, recited a confirmation number I didn't bother to write down, and wished me a pleasant day. I hung up the phone. The click of the receiver settling into its cradle was the loudest sound in the house. It was done. 60 months of servitude. Finished. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt nothing at all. And the absence of the crushing weight on my shoulders was so profound, it was almost dizzying. For 5 years, I had carried a ghost on my back. The ghost of a second mortgage. And I hadn't even realized how much it had stooped my posture until it was gone. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, a habit ingrained from decades of rising before the sun. But this time was different. Usually, my first conscious thought was a dull, anxious calculation of the day's expenses, a mental ledger that always ended with the looming figure of that $2.800 payment. This morning, there was only silence, a calm, clean slate. The sunlight streaming through my bedroom window seemed brighter, less accusatory. I got up and went to the kitchen. For the past 5 years, my morning coffee had been a rushed affair, a bitter, instant fuel to get me out the door. Today, I took out the French press from the back of the cupboard, the one my late wife had loved. I ground the good Kona beans, the ones I kept for special occasions that never seemed to arrive. The aroma that filled my small kitchen as the hot water steeped was rich and dark, a luxury I hadn't allowed myself to properly enjoy in a long time. It smelled like my own life. I poured a cup, black, and took it to the living room. I sat in my father's old leather chair, the worn material groaning comfortably under my weight. I picked up the newspaper. For years, I'd only scanned the headlines, too preoccupied with work and worry to truly read. Today, I read it cover to cover. I read about a zoning dispute in the next town over, about the high school basketball team's surprising victory, about the upcoming charity bake sale at the community center. It felt like I was reintroducing myself to the world and to my own time, one unhurried minute at a time. I was a citizen of this town, not just a walking, breathing wallet. The peace was broken around 10 o'clock by the shrill, impatient ring of my cell phone. I glanced at the screen. The name Chloe glowing there. A part of me, the old me, felt a Pavlovian jolt of anxiety. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, letting the rich flavor settle on my tongue before I answered. I let it ring 4 times. Hello, I kept my voice neutral. Wesley. Her voice was sharp, clipped, devoid of any warmth. She never called me Dad. Unless she was performing for my son, it was always Wesley, spoken with the tone of a manager addressing a slow employee. My parents' flight lands at Denver International at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Their confirmation number is 7B42GL. Be there. It wasn't a request. It was an order, a command issued with the casual authority of someone who had never once considered the possibility of being told no. My hand tightened on my coffee cup, the ceramic warm against my skin. I could feel my pulse quicken. Old, familiar anger beginning to stir, but I kept it caged. And listen, she continued, not waiting for a response, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial, condescending tone. Wear something decent. A collared shirt. At least, you know my mother is particular. The last thing we need is for her to be picked up by, well, you know. The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Picked up by a common laborer. Picked up by someone who works with his hands. I looked down at my comfortable flannel shirt and worn-in jeans. My work clothes. The clothes of the man who paid for the plane tickets her parents were on. The man who paid for the gasoline she burned in her oversized SUV. The man who paid for the very roof over her head. Chloe, why can't you or Ethan pick them up? I asked. My voice was dangerously even. A flat line on a heart monitor. A sigh on the other end. Heavy with theatrical impatience. As if I'd just asked the stupidest question in the world. Then, a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound completely without humor. Like ice cracking. Oh. Don't tell me you're still sulking about the Christmas dinner. Honestly. Wesley. I thought you were tougher than that. We're busy. We have last-minute preparations to make for the party. You have nothing but time." She paused, and I could practically hear the smirk forming on her lips. "Just be useful for once. Wesley, don't embarrass us." There it was. The truth, laid bare in 2 sentences. My function in her world was to be useful. My existence was a potential source of embarrassment. I was a tool, to be kept in the shed until needed. And even then, to be wiped clean so as not to soil the user. For a brief, searing second, I thought about telling her about the canceled payment. I imagined the delicious shock in her voice, the sputtering rage that would follow, but that would be a strategic error. A battle is not won by revealing your position before the engagement begins. No. This required a different approach. "You're right," I said, my voice smooth as glass. "You can count on me." She hung up without another word, the connection severing abruptly. I slowly lowered the phone. I finished my coffee, rinsed the cup with methodical care, and placed it in the dishwasher. Then I went out to my workshop in the garage. The familiar smell of sawdust and oil was a comfort. This was my sanctuary, a place where things made sense, where effort produced tangible results. I spent the rest of the day in blissful, productive silence. I repaired the loose board on my back porch, a job I'd been putting off for months, sinking the new screws with a satisfying finality. I sharpened the blades on my lawnmower. The screech of the grinding wheel, a welcome noise. I listened to an old rock station on the radio. The music, a welcome companion to the rhythmic work of my hands. 2 o'clock came and went. The sun reached its zenith and began its slow descent. My phone remained in the house, on silent, a silent testament to my newfound freedom. A few hours later, just as the evening sun was beginning to set, casting long, peaceful shadows across my yard, I went back inside. I picked up my phone. The screen was lit up with a string of notifications. A digital tantrum, 5 missed calls from Chloe, and a series of texts. 4:15 p.m. Where are you? My parents have been waiting for 45 minutes. 4:30 p.m. Pick up your phone. Wesley, this isn't funny. 4:45 p.m. They had to take an $80 taxi. An $80 taxi because of you. I can't believe you'd be this selfish. 5:00 p.m. I don't know what kind of pathetic game you're playing. But you will pay for this. I promise you that. I read the messages without emotion. I noted the complete lack of concern, the absence of a single question asking if I was okay. The only crime was the inconvenience. The only sin was the $80. I was a faulty appliance, and she was furious about the repair bill. I deleted the entire thread. It was just noise, the meaningless buzzing of an angry insect. 3 days passed in a strange, dense quiet. It was the 23rd of December. I assumed they were stewing in their anger, planning some petty punishment. Perhaps another lecture from Ethan about my difficult behavior. I underestimated them. I underestimated their capacity for cruelty, and the lengths to which they would go to protect their fragile image. That afternoon, my old friend and former colleague, Dave, stopped by. He's a retired plumber, a man of few words and solid character. He had a grim look on his face and a folded copy of the local paper, the Silver Creek Gazette, in his hand. "Wes," he said, skipping the usual pleasantries and getting straight to the point. "You need to see this." He handed me the paper, folded to an article on the local interest page. The headline hit me like a physical blow. knocking the wind out of my lungs. Heartless father abandons elderly in-laws in winter blizzard. My hands trembled slightly as I took the paper. My name wasn't in the headline, but it didn't need to be. I read the article, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. It told a harrowing, completely fabricated story. It spoke of two senior citizens, Chloe's parent, left stranded for hours at the airport during a treacherous unforecasted snowstorm. It painted a vivid picture of them, shivering and frightened, abandoned by their daughter's unreliable father-in-law. It went on to quote an anonymous family source, no doubt, Richard, Chloe's arrogant father, who expressed deep concern for my increasingly erratic and unstable behavior. The article didn't just report an incident, it assassinated my character. It painted me as a bitter, unstable old man who had callously endangered the lives of two innocent people out of petty spite. A snowstorm. I looked out my window at the clear, blue sky. I remembered the day of the airport incident perfectly. It had been 52 degrees and sunny. You could have comfortably worn a light jacket. There hadn't been a single snowflake. But the facts didn't matter. The lie was printed in black and white, for the whole town to see. Richard, a man who loved to brag about his connections, who sat on the board of the local country club, had called in a favor. He hadn't just gotten angry, he'd launched a public assault. This wasn't an insult anymore. This was a declaration of war, an attempt to systematically destroy my reputation, my good name, the one thing I had built with my own hands over 50 years in this community. They didn't just want me out of their lives, they wanted to ruin mine. That was the moment, the cold, dense weight of my anger finally solidified into purpose. This was no longer a family dispute. This was about my honor, my legacy. You don't get to burn a man's house down and then complain about the smell of smoke. I spent the rest of that day and all of the next in my home office. Grief and shock were luxuries I could no longer afford. They were replaced by the methodical focus of a craftsman preparing for his most important project. I turned on my old desktop computer and my printer, the hum of the machinery filling the quiet house. A soundtrack for my cold resolve. I logged into my online banking portal and, page by page, downloaded and printed 60 months of statements. I took out a yellow highlighter and marked every single $2.800 transfer to my son's mortgage account. The growing stack of paper on my desk was a testament to their greed. I went through my digital receipts, printing out the bills for the living room furniture, the high-end washer and dryer, the ridiculously expensive stainless steel refrigerator they just had to have. Then I moved to social media, a world I rarely entered. I scrolled through years of Chloe's carefully curated life, taking screenshots of every boastful post that corresponded with one of my major payments. The new patio furniture I'd paid for. Captioned, "Enjoying the fruits of our labor." The purebred puppy that had cost $2,000. Captioned, "Our new baby." The trip to Aspen I had unknowingly funded, disguised as a business expense. Every image was another piece of evidence, another brick in the wall of truth I was building. Late on Christmas Eve, as I was sorting the documents into neat, dumping piles, my hand brushed against an old folder labeled Correspondence. Out of curiosity, I opened it. Tucked inside was a printout of an email from 2 years prior. I had saved it because the request had been so brazen at the time. It was from Chloe. My eyes scanned the cloyingly sweet text. "Hi, Wesley, hope you're well. I was just looking online, and I found the most perfect KitchenAid stand mixer. It's royal blue, and it would just complete our dream kitchen. I know it's a bit pricey, but I was hoping you could see your way to helping us out. It would mean the world to me. XOXO. Chloe." I remembered that email, and I remembered the $600 charge on my credit card statement the following week. Complete the dream kitchen. I murmured to myself, the words leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was the smile of a man who had just found his sharpest tool. I printed 13 copies of the email and placed one on top of each of the 13 evidence packets I had assembled, one for the family, and one for each of their future party guests. My plan was almost complete. I had the ammunition. Now I just needed the guest list. I turned back to my computer. The glow of the screen illuminating my face in the dark room. My fingers flew across the keyboard. No longer the tired, aching fingers of a victim, but the precise, determined fingers of a man about to deliver his own form of justice. I typed a new search query into the browser. Richard Sterling. Sterling and Associates. Annual Christmas party. The search didn't take long. Richard Sterling was not a man who valued subtlety. His accounting firm, Sterling and Associates, had a public-facing website and a social media presence that screamed old money and new arrogance. There, on their company's event page, was a glowing announcement for their annual Christmas Eve gala. A tradition, the site boasted, for 20 years. It was an exclusive affair. Of course. But the announcement included a photo gallery from the previous year's event. I scanned the smiling, well-dressed faces, putting names to the people my son and his wife were so desperate to impress. There were bankers, real estate developers, a few local politicians, the pillars of the Silver Creek community. I counted 12 prominent guests in the main photos. Besides Richard's own family, my math had been correct. 13 folders. Christmas Eve arrived with a cold, clear sky. The air was crisp, and the setting sun painted the horizon in shades of deep orange and purple. There was a quiet stillness to the world, the kind that only happens on a major holiday, when the usual hustle and bustle of life comes to a halt. For me, it was the calm before the storm. I didn't spend the day feeling anxious or angry. The time for that was past. I felt a profound and unsettling clarity. The focus of a craftsman, on the verge of a difficult but necessary job. This was just another project, one that required precision, patience, and a steady hand. I laid out my clothes on my bed. Not a suit, I didn't own one. Just my best pair of dark trousers, freshly pressed, and a simple, clean, collared shirt. It was the kind of outfit I'd wear to a funeral or a wedding. Respectably. Invisible. I took a shower, the hot water washing away the phantom grit of the work week. As I buttoned my shirt, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My face was lined. My hair was more gray than brown, but my eyes were steady. They belonged to a man who knew exactly who he was and what he was about to do. Into my old leather briefcase, a gift from my wife on our 10th anniversary, I packed the 13 manila folders. Each one was thick with the paper trail of their deceit. I checked the contents of one at random, my calloused fingers flipping past the bank statements, the receipts, the glossy, smiling screenshots from Instagram, and the final, damning email about a royal blue stand mixer. It was all there. I closed the briefcase, the latches clicking shut with a sound of finality. The drive to Silver Creek felt different this time. Usually, when I made the trip, it was with a sense of obligation, a feeling of visiting a foreign country where I didn't speak the language. Tonight, I felt like a soldier moving into enemy territory. The Christmas lights on the sprawling suburban houses seemed to mock me. Their cheerful, twinkling colors a stark contrast to the cold purpose in my heart. These people, in their warm, bright homes, I had no idea about the lies that held up the foundations of their perfect little world. They had no idea that one of their own was about to be exposed. I didn't park in front of the house. That would be too obvious. Instead, I found a spot 2 blocks away on a quiet, tree-lined street. I got out of my old, reliable truck, the engine ticking as it cooled in the frigid air. I took my briefcase, locked the doors, and began to walk. The cold bit at my cheeks. I could see my breath pluming in front of me. As I got closer, I could hear the faint sounds of the party, the gentle rhythm of soft jazz music, the murmur of conversation, the occasional burst of high-pitched, brittle laughter. I stopped across the street, shrouded in the shadows of a large oak tree. The house was ablaze with light. Every window glowed with a warm, inviting yellow. Through the large picture window in the living room, I could see the silhouettes of people mingling, holding wine glasses, looking perfectly at ease. It was the picture of holiday perfection, a scene from a Christmas card, a scene I had paid for, but was not invited to be a part of. I waited. My timing had to be perfect, not during the initial mingling, but not after the dinner was finished. It had to be at the moment of peak performance, when they were all seated, captive, celebrating their own success and good fortune. I watched as the silhouettes moved from the living room towards what I knew was the formal dining room. After about 10 minutes, the movement stopped. The show was about to begin. I crossed the street, to my shoes, making no sound on the manicured lawn. I didn't go to the grand front door with its ostentatious wreath. That would have been foolish. I knew from a previous visit, when I had been summoned to fix a leaking pipe under the sink, a job Ethan should have handled himself, that they often left the side utility door unlocked. It led into a small mudroom off the kitchen. It was a servant's entrance. Tonight. That felt appropriate. The handle turned silently under my hand. The door opened with a soft click. I slipped inside, closing it gently behind me. I was in. The air was thick with the rich smells of roasted turkey and expensive perfume from the kitchen. I could hear the clatter of pots and pans as a hired catering staff cleaned up. They wouldn't notice me. I moved through the house like a ghost, my heart a steady, slow drum in my chest. I paused at the doorway to the formal dining room, my briefcase held tight in my hand. The scene was exactly as I had pictured it. A long, polished mahogany table, laden with the remains of a feast, fine china, crystal glasses, silver candelabras. Seated around the table were the 12 guests from the photographs, along with Richard and his wife, Chloe, and my son, Ethan. Richard was at the head of the table, holding a glass of wine. A smug, self-satisfied look on his face as he told some story. Laughter rippled through the guests. They were a captive audience, basking in his reflected glory. I stepped into the doorway. For a moment, no one saw me. Then Ethan, who was seated facing my direction, looked up. The color drained from his face. He froze, a piece of bread halfway to his mouth. His reaction was a silent alarm. One by one, the other heads turned. The laughter died. The story Richard was telling trailed off into an awkward silence. A fork clattered onto a plate, the sound echoing in the suddenly quiet room. Every eye was on me. I saw confusion, curiosity, and on the faces of Richard and Chloe, a flash of pure, unadulterated rage. Chloe was the first to find her voice. Her face, which had been arranged in a mask of pleasant hospitality, contorted into a snarl. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You were not invited. You need to leave. Right now." She started to rise from her chair. A queen, about to banish a peasant from her court. I didn't say a word. I simply held up one hand, palm out. It was a simple gesture, the same one I used on a job site to signal a halt. It was so unexpected, so calm and so utterly authoritative in this setting, that it stopped her cold. She froze, half standing, her mouth slightly agape. The room was silent. I walked forward, my footsteps making no sound on the thick Persian rug. I placed my briefcase on a small serving table, opened it, and took out the stack of 13 manila folders. The guests watched my every move, their eyes wide. I started at one end of the table and began to move around it, my pace steady and deliberate. I placed a folder in front of each of the 12 guests. Their hands recoiled as if the folders were hot. "Now see here," Richard blustered, finally finding his voice and pushing his chair back. "You have no right to come into my home and—" I stopped and turned to face him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten him. I just looked at him. I let him see the 5 years of quiet humiliation, the betrayal, the cold, calculated anger in my eyes. I held his gaze until he faltered, the bluster draining from his face, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty, of fear. He was a bully, and bullies are cowards when their bluff is called. He sank back into his chair. I placed the final, thickest folder in the empty space at the other end of the table. Then I stepped back. For a long moment, no one moved. The air was thick with tension. Then, one of the guests, a banker with silver hair and a look of weary curiosity, tentatively reached out and opened his folder. A few others followed his lead. The room filled with a new sound, the soft, dry rustle of paper. It grew louder as all 12 guests began to leaf through the evidence I had compiled. I watched their faces. I saw their polite, party-ready smiles dissolve, replaced by frowns of confusion. The confusion then morphed into dawning comprehension as they connected the dots, the highlighted bank transfers, the corresponding Instagram posts, the receipts for ludicrously expensive items. I saw a woman's hand fly to her mouth. I saw 2 men exchange a wide-eyed, incredulous look across the table. I saw the banker's jaw tighten as he read. The story was telling itself, in black and white, far more effectively than I ever could. When the rustling of paper subsided and a heavy, suffocating silence had fallen upon the room, I finally spoke. My voice was not loud, but it was clear and steady, and it carried to every corner of the room. "Good evening," I said. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Wesley. I am Ethan's father, and I am the man who sponsored this party." I let that sink in before continuing, gesturing to the folders in front of them. "What you have in your hands is a summary of the last 5 years of my life. It's a detailed record of the $237, $468 I have paid for this house, for the life my son and his wife enjoy, the down payment, 60 consecutive mortgage payments, the furniture, the landscaping. It's all in there." I reached into my own jacket pocket and pulled out my folded copy of the Silver Creek Gazette. I held it up for all to see. This is how my generosity was repaid. Your host, Mr. Sterling, was kind enough to inform the entire town that I abandoned his wife and him in a blizzard. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the stunned faces. A blizzard that never happened. On a day that was 52 degrees and sunny, I let the newspaper drop onto the table. It landed with a soft, final thud. Then, I turned my gaze directly to Chloe. She had gone a ghostly white, her hand clutching Ethan's arm under the table. "And Chloe," I said, my voice dropping slightly, "I do hope you're enjoying your new stand mixer. The royal blue one. I believe the email where you told me it would complete your dream kitchen is on page 12 of your guests' packets." This was the final blow. The specific, personal detail that made it all undeniably real. I saw a flicker of comprehension and pity in the eyes of some of the guests. They understood now. They saw the whole ugly picture. I looked from Chloe to Ethan to Richard. I was told I was not welcome here for Christmas dinner. That I didn't fit the vibe. You see, they're embarrassed by me. They're embarrassed by my truck. By my simple house. By the dirt that's permanently etched into the lines on my hands. They look down on me because I work for a living. But they were never, ever embarrassed by my money. I took a final look around the ruined party. The feast was uneaten. The guests were silent, avoiding the eyes of their hosts. The festive atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by the cold, harsh reality of the truth. "That's fine," I said quietly. "I accept that, but what I will no longer do is pay for the privilege of my own humiliation. Enjoy your dinner." I turned, without looking back, and walked out of the dining room. I didn't slam the door. I didn't run. I walked with the steady, even pace of a man who had just finished a long and difficult job. I let myself out through the side door and closed it gently behind me. The soft click of the latch, sealing the tomb of their perfect Christmas. The cold night air was a shock after the stuffy, overheated dining room. It hit my face and filled my lungs, feeling clean and sharp, washing away the lingering scent of roast turkey and deceit. I didn't look back. I walked across the manicured lawn. My shoes, leaving dark prints in the light frost that was beginning to form. The cheerful, twinkling Christmas lights that adorned the house now seemed garish and desperate. A frantic attempt to project a warmth that didn't exist within its walls. The soft jazz music was still playing. A bizarre and inappropriate soundtrack for the social carnage I had just instigated. The 2-block walk back to my truck was the longest of my life. My body felt strangely light. As if a great weight I hadn't even noticed I was carrying had been surgically removed. My hands, shoved deep into my pockets, were perfectly steady. There was no elation, no thrill of victory, just a quiet, hollow sense of finality. It was the feeling a surgeon must have after a long and difficult amputation. There is no joy in the cutting. Only a grim satisfaction that the sickness has been removed. The drive home was silent. I didn't turn on the radio. The streets of Silver Creek were quiet. Families tucked away in their homes, celebrating. I felt like a visitor from another world. A ghost passing through their idyllic holiday scenes. When I finally pulled into my own driveway, the sight of my small, familiar house was a profound comfort. It wasn't grand. It wasn't impressive. But it was honest. Every brick, every board, was a testament to a life of hard work, not a life of lies. Inside, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in my father's old leather chair in the dark. The briefcase resting on the floor beside me. The job was done. The truth was out. The rest was just a matter of waiting for the fallout. 3 months later, the first signs of spring were beginning to show. The stubborn Ohio snow had finally melted, leaving the ground soft and muddy. I was driving back from a supply run when I decided to take a detour through Silver Creek. It wasn't a conscious decision, more of a morbid curiosity. The way a person might prod a sore tooth to see if it still hurts. As I turned onto their street, I saw it. The lawn, once a perfect carpet of manicured green, was now patchy and brown. A few sad, neglected weeds were sprouting near the walkway. But that wasn't what caught my eye. Taped to the grand front door, flapping slightly in the breeze, was a bright orange piece of paper, a notice of foreclosure from the bank. It was official, impersonal, brutal. Further down the driveway was a small U-Haul trailer, the kind you rent for a day. Ethan was hauling a cardboard box out of the garage. His movements slow and tired. His shoulders were slumped. The easy confidence he once wore like a tailored suit, now gone. Replaced by the ill-fitting coat of defeat. Chloe was standing beside the trailer, directing him. She was wearing expensive athletic wear that now seemed strangely out of place, like a costume from a different life. She looked thinner, her face tight with a familiar, simmering anger. As I drove slowly past, she looked up and our eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no recognition in her gaze, only a blank, hostile stare, the kind you give a stranger who has cut you off in traffic. They were losing everything, and they had learned nothing. I kept driving and didn't look back. The tooth didn't hurt anymore. A few weeks after that, on a Saturday afternoon, I was in my workshop, sanding a piece of oak I was planning to use to build a new bookshelf. The rhythmic scrape of the sandpaper against the wood was calming, a familiar and satisfying sound. I was so focused on the task at hand that I didn't hear the footsteps on my driveway until a shadow fell across the open garage door. I looked up, my hand stilling. It was Ethan. He looked worse up close. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he had lost a significant amount of weight. His clothes, once stylish and expensive, were rumpled, as if he'd slept in them. He just stood there at the edge of the driveway, on the border between the public street and my private property, looking like a lost soul who didn't know which way to turn. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the concrete floor of the garage. "Dad," he said. His voice was a hoarse whisper, barely audible. He didn't move. He just stood there. A grown man radiating a shame, so profound it was almost a physical presence. I put down the piece of wood and the sandpaper. I wiped my dusty hands on my jeans. I waited. This was his journey, not mine. He had to be the one to cross the threshold. He finally took a shuffling step forward. Then another. He stopped just inside the garage, surrounded by the tools and materials of my trade. The evidence of a life he had once been so eager to escape. His shoulders began to shake. And then he was crying. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a silent, broken weeping. The kind that comes from a place of utter despair. "I'm so sorry," he choked out, the words catching in his throat. I was a coward. I let her. I let them. I just stood there while they treated you like that. Like you were nothing. He finally looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and swimming with tears. All that talk about vibes and status. It was all her parents. Richard filled her head with all this nonsense about appearances, about who was good enough, and I was too weak to stand up to him. Too weak to stand up for you. He took a ragged breath. I let money and vanity blind me. I was so proud of that house, of the life I thought I was building, but I didn't build any of it. You did. and I just took it for granted. I took you for granted. I'm so sorry. Dad. He looked like he was about to collapse. The anger I had carried for so long was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness for the boy in front of me. The son I had raised to be a better man than this. I walked over to the old metal cooler where I kept bottles of water and took one out. I handed it to him. His hand was trembling as he took it. Come inside. Son. I said, my voice softer than I expected. He followed me into the house, into the small, clean kitchen. He sat down at the simple wooden table where he'd eaten breakfast 1,000 times as a child. I sat across from him. He unscrewed the cap from the water bottle but didn't drink. I forgive you, Ethan, I said, and the words felt true as I spoke them. I forgive you. A wave of relief washed over his face. So palpable, it was as if a physical weight had been lifted from him. But I wasn't finished. But you need to understand something. I continued, leaning forward slightly. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it sure as hell doesn't mean we go back to the way things were. That man is gone. The ATM is closed for business. Permanently. He nodded, looking down at the table. I know. I don't expect. Chloe and I. We're staying at her parents' house. It's not good. That's your path to walk now, I said, my voice firm, but not unkind. And I won't be paying for it. Not one more dime. You're a grown man. Ethan, it's time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet. This lesson, as hard as it is one you have to learn for yourself. If you don't, you'll spend the rest of your life as a puppet for other people's ambitions. I told him that if he truly wanted to rebuild our relationship, the door was open, but it would be a new relationship, one built on a foundation of mutual respect, not one-sided sacrifice. He would come to my house, he would share my simple life, and he would have to earn his place back in it. Not with money, but with character. He left a little while later. As I watched him walk away, his shoulders still slumped, but with a flicker of something new in his step, maybe the first seeds of resolve, I felt the last of the bitterness drain out of me. I walked back into the living room and sat down in my father's chair. The house was quiet, filled with the warm afternoon sun. I looked around at the comfortable familiar room. For the first time in 5 years, it felt completely and utterly mine. The air felt lighter. I felt lighter. The following Christmas was different. There were no grand invitations. No talk of vibes or private atmospheres. That afternoon, my next-door neighbor, a kind, warm woman named Rosa, whose family had lived on this street as long as mine had, knocked on my door. Wesley, she said, her smile framed by laugh lines. My grandkids are driving me crazy. Come over and have a plate with us. Save me from them. I walked with her across the lawn that separated our 2 houses. Her home was the opposite of Ethan and Chloe's mansion. It was loud, a little messy, and filled to the brim with life. Grandkids were running through the living room. A football game was blaring on the television, and the air was thick with the smell of roasting garlic and the sound of boisterous, genuine laughter. I was handed a plate of food, a bottle of beer, and pulled into a rambling conversation about the Cleveland Browns with her son-in-law. No one asked me what I did for a living. No one cared what kind of car I drove. I was just Wesley, their neighbor. Later that evening, I was standing by the window, watching the snow begin to fall in thick, silent flakes. Just as it had on the night of my confrontation a year ago, A small hand slipped into mine. It was Rosa's youngest granddaughter, a little girl with big, curious brown eyes. She just stood there with me, watching the snow, in that simple, quiet moment, surrounded by the warmth and chaos of a real family. I understood. The revenge had never been the point. It was about reclaiming my own life. A year ago, I had lost a house that I had paid for. But in the process, I had found myself again, and that was a foundation no amount of money could ever buy.